The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.
Empire.
Being shut in gives some of us a way to reconnect with our past.
Initially, the only competition was for board games, and we moved to the forefront very quickly. I would say by the year 1966, 67, it became the number one game.
That's Hal Richman, the creator of Strat-O-Matic Baseball, a game ahead of its time and doing its best now to keep up with the times. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. Hal Richman and the current research director of Strat-O-Matic, John Garcia, join us to talk about being part of a sabermetric wave before anyone knew what to call it, and how a game like Strat-O-Matic seeks to use modern technology to stay relevant in a competitive sports gaming space. I really wonder what Hal Richman would have thought of robotic umpiring. Hannah Keyser will join us later to tell us where that is now that a baseball season's on hold. But first, the future is now with how teams are using tech to get ready for the season, if there is a season. So as of this date, we have heard 8 million different plans to get baseball's 2020 season started, and none are set in stone yet, but there's a lot of ideas out there. Meantime, teams have to figure out a way to be ready when the season does begin, if we're going to be optimistic that it will. Andrew Baggarly joins us now from The Athletic. Hey, Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Let's talk about the Giants. How are they approaching staying in shape mentally and physically as we hope for a baseball season this summer?
Well, I think it sort of runs the gamut, and really it depends on just where people are, where they're sheltering in place, what they have access to. I mean, there are some people who, own their own facility or have their own, pretty deluxe home gym, or they, know somebody who has a hitting facility that obviously as a non-essential business can't be open to the public. So they're able to get in, a little more work with the facilities they have. There are other people like Mauricio Dubon, they're a young infielder. He's with his girlfriend in a high-rise apartment in Miami, and he had put up a bunch of netting, and he's turned his balcony into a little tiny, narrow batting cage. So people are having to get more creative in some areas than others. And some guys are using the virtual reality to try to, simulate whatever they can simulate, because some of this is just going to be, hey, what skills can I try to retain through this? So I can be ready for an opening day that is still uncertain.
Well, I think the real question here is, we're talking about the highest echelon of the sport. Is baseball riding a bike that when they get back out on the field, that even if they've missed some time, that it'll come back, right? Isn't it muscle memory?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is the swing is a lot of muscle memory. Even, talking to some of the Giants hitting coaches, they think that even when guys were working on sort of overhauling an approach in spring training, those things should be kind of sticky. The skills that can get away from you are pitch recognition, plate discipline, timing, those kinds of things. And I mean, it's just really, really hard for hitters to train for that without seeing velocity, without seeing the actual ball out of the pitcher's hand. Pitchers can throw all day into a net or against a wall or whatever and maintain some semblance of being in game shape. But it's hitters being able to simulate all of those things that make up the decision in that fraction of a second of whether I swing or not. That's the hardest thing, I think, and that's what people are puzzling through. And really, that's something in terms of training that's been a focus within the sport already, is how can we replicate these game reps so we can get more of them and get players to sort of develop those skills even faster.
Well, that brings us back to VR, which you wrote a piece about in The Athletic. Let me ask a couple parts of this. One, how much were the Giants utilizing it before the pandemic, and how are they utilizing it now as a substitute for real life training?
Yeah, so they were into it with the Win Reality program, and I think they had considered a wider rollout of the goggles with the computer backpack, and you put up the two little sort of posts with the two sensors on it. And obviously, it's not going to be like a perfect video game where you can see a result and realize, hey, based on the way I swung the bat, that would have been a double to the gap, or that would have had an exit velocity of 102 miles an hour or whatever. But the fact that they can load up video that's very realistic of any pitcher with all the different pitches that they throw and put it in the background of any ballpark. Like talking to Mike Yastrzemski of the Giants, he said, I faced Max Scherzer a whole heck of a lot, and he's really, really tough, but I really like when I can, recognize a pitch out of the hand, or I can feel like I have some semblance of timing. Who knows if that's going to translate, but it's better than nothing right now. And, I think the Giants were considering a wider rollout to try to send this stuff to everybody. Yastrzemski's doing it in his backyard in Nashville, Tennessee. He takes off his goggles and he's no longer at Nationals Park. He's in Nashville, but it is pretty expensive, and obviously teams aren't pulling in any revenue right now. So for the guys who can afford it or who have it as part of their training, it's one of those things that can only help.
All right, I'll let you go with this. I like asking everybody who's involved in the sport what they think. Right now, today, a guess, when does the season start and what does it look like? Where is it taking place?
Well, I wish I were that smart. I just think we are always dealing with new information. This whole thing is just moving goalposts. It's been that way ever since, the middle of March, when we realized that this thing was going to become a pandemic. I do think that once there's more of a rollout of testing, to where it isn't a bad look for baseball to be using all of these tests every day on players because they're not available elsewhere with people who are healthcare workers, et cetera. I think that's going to be a big key. I don't think you're going to see players be quarantined in hotels like they were talking about earlier. It sounds like they're thinking that maybe something could happen around the beginning of July, with a couple weeks of sort of a quasi spring training before that. I do think that there is enough incentive and enough political pressure, and enough monetary ambitions on both sides to try to find a way to rescue this season. And you know what? They're going to be watching Korea very, very closely to see how that rollout goes, because if players start testing positive and they have to shut it down again, then I think that's going to deal a big blow to people's hopes. But I think that the general feeling now is that there is an imperative to get baseball going, and if they can do so safely and responsibly, they're going to do it.
Andrew Baggarly of The Athletic, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Up next, Hal Richman, creator of Strat-O-Matic, on creating one of the greatest sports games ever. This is the Future Sport Podcast. So we're in the era of social distancing, and if you are looking for something to do and to kill some time, and particularly connect with sports as we wait for them to come back, there is an age-old game that is available to you that has been modernized, Strat-O-Matic Baseball. And truth be told, 10-year-old me would be doing that all day, every day, in this time of social distancing, and 47-year-old me is thinking about it again as we try to fill that time and fill the void. We're very pleased to have the creator of Strat-O-Matic, Hal Richman, here, and the research director of the company, John Garcia. Hi, guys. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
No, glad to be here. Thanks.
Hal, let me start with you here. Take me back. Why did you create Strat-O-Matic?
I was a frustrated athlete. I was a very ordinary athlete. I guess you would call me an intramural athlete. But I just loved athletics, particularly baseball, when I was very young. and it was my way of connecting with the sports. I mean, I played all the sports, baseball and basketball primarily, some football. You know, I never really excelled. So when I was about 11 years old, I was playing a game that called All-Star Baseball, but it was not satisfying. It wasn't that accurate. And also, the game only measured one thing, hitting. So if you had a great pitcher, say like Walter Johnson or Sandy Koufax, they had All-Stars. He was great at his hitting, not his pitching. So at 11, I basically came up with a game, and in order to make it as accurate as possible, I rolled the dice 5,000 times to create a dice probability table. At that point, you know, I was able to then create some baseball cards. They were very much different than they are today. I only measured hitting and pitching. There was today the game measures almost everything except for popcorn. So it was the beginning, though. It was the beginning of learning my craft, creating board games. And it was when I was age 22. Made an effort then to try to get my games into the market. I had at that point a baseball game, a basketball game, also a football game, and other non-sports games. And what I did do with my mother, who was in the real estate business, indicated that she had a client who was a toy buyer. I went over to his house, and we spent a lot of time together, over 3 hours, and he was very knowledgeable. And he looked at all my products, and he eventually said, "You have a lot of talent, but the games are not as playable as they should be." And so I went back, and I grabbed a pair of dice, I grabbed several dice. And I kept on rolling, and all of a sudden it hit me that the game could be played in a different way with 3 dice instead of 2, with one die being read separately from the other 2 dice. And that began at age 22. The game that hit the market when I was age 25 in 1961. And, the rest is history. The early years were very difficult, but I was able to survive, and eventually by 1963 I knew how to do it properly from a publicity point of view, promotional point of view, and also what the fans wanted. They wanted an entire set of teams. There were 16 teams then. The first two products that Strat-O-Matic had, the first product was only 80 teams set, all-star set with a couple of top teams additional. And the 120 team set expanded it a bit, but still wasn't what they wanted. They wanted all 16 teams. And so in the 1963 set was the first set that had that.
How did you get access to the types of statistical information that you would need to try to make this as accurate as possible?
Well, initially, the only thing that was available was official statistics. And it also was a problem there because they didn't come out till March. And that was all right when I did the 80 and the 120 player set. So when I had to do the 320 players, 16 teams, it was a problem. It was a tremendous job. And I went to Alliance Bureau, the famous Seymour Swire, who passed away in last year. And Seymour was a very interesting man. He felt he was the guardian. He was the guardian of the baseball statistics, and he was very reluctant to give it to outsiders. So I called him up, and he was very, very difficult to speak to initially, and then I told him I would pay him for it, and I would pay $25 to see the statistics and be able to get the statistics from you in January. He said, "All right, kid, don't forget this. Come on over, and I'll give them to you." I came over there out to Fifth Avenue, and where the organization still remains. And I started talking to him, and he was really a nice guy. He had a very difficult outside reach to people. He said, "All right, you can have it for nothing. Don't worry about it." And he let me copy statistics and take them home, and work with them in January. And that was enabled me to come out with the statistics in March. The problem at that time, the game was a basic game, so all it needed were the official statistics. some of the I did some reading, obviously, to try to get the baseball fielding ratings right, but it was all the official statistics. In 1971, we came out with the advanced game, and the advanced game needed lefty-righty statistics, for instance, and many other things. And at that point, Strat-O-Matic was in business since 1960, went 10 years, and what we did, the first couple of years, we actually created the lefty-righty statistics ourselves by going through the box scores of all the games and getting that information. And of course, we got a lot of other information to give us ratings for other characteristics of the players. And so we kept on adding as we went along. Finally, there was a company that came out that was collecting box scores, and we worked with them, and we were able to get box scores lefty-righty without any difficulty at that point. It was tough, though, in the old-timer season, and initially we were going through the box scores on, for instance, we did the 1911 season, which is the oldest season we ever did by hand, right? When I mean by that, we actually went right to the box scores. It took almost 2 years of work to do it. And we had an individual who became very much an expert in that area. He pulled all the lefty-righty information out, and eventually the stats were there, and we were able to get them in the future. After I guess in the 80s, it would probably be the late 80s. Statistics started to become available.
John, let me get your just overview of the game. Clearly, this was way ahead of its time, as it has links to fantasy sports. It has links to analytics. It's prior to Bill James being part of the Boston Red Sox. Can you just kind of describe, as you work with the modern version of this, what this has meant to sports?
Of course, yeah. So, like you said, Strat-O-Matic was kind of almost the founder of sabermetrics, in that people who played the game recognized what statistics, such as on-base percentage, meant to building a lineup, and how important that was to players, which didn't really get to Major League Baseball until many years later in Oakland first. But it has affected how many people, or how people view baseball players itself. How one of the statistics that you mentioned was that 40% of executives at one point, of baseball executives, have played Strat-O-Matic. It's just clearly an indication of what Strat-O-Matic, the thought process behind playing it, and what it brings you.
So obviously there's an opportunity here with simulation and people inside, and they are looking for outlets. And there is, at time of this taping, no professional sports going on, and we'll see when they come back. How are you all trying to position Strat-O-Matic to get it to the forefront for people to either, like in my case, get back together with it and re-engage with it, or to expose it to a new audience?
Sure. So, there's so many people who played Strat-O-Matic previously, and some of them don't, they played it as kids, and they grew up, they had families, and they just kind of lost touch with the game. And now that we're running this sim, and of course it's a terrible thing that what's going on in the world, and unfortunately, we're all craving baseball. We can't wait for Major League Baseball to return. But what we're doing, at least with this sim, we're hopefully just getting baseball back to people who are missing it. And people who played Strat-O-Matic as a kid, they're finding it again, and new people who just are missing baseball. Either they play fantasy, they just love watching their favorite team every day. Strat-O-Matic is giving them an opportunity to watch and play their favorite game.
Hal, how do you view competition through the years? Because when you started this game, it was original, it was unique. There really was nothing like it for people like me, who I think were a lot like you, that really wanted to deep dive into the sport itself. Now you've got video games, you've got esports, you've got fantasy sports, you've got the internet. How have you kind of viewed staying competitive with Strat-O-Matic through the years?
Well, you're right. Initially, the only competition was for board games. And we moved to the forefront very quickly. I would say by the year 1960, 66, 67, it became the number one board game, personality board game, utilizing players. But today, you're right. I mean, there's tremendous competition, and what we have done, we've created a niche for ourselves. We do more work on creating the ratings and things like that for each player. We do a lot of reading. We use statistics. We really go into it in great depth, and people recognize this. So there is a certain realism to our game that you won't find with the other products, as to what describing the player's actual abilities. We have reached out. Going from in the 1986, we began to create computer games, and today we have a very astute baseball Windows game that is. It can be played at 3 different levels, like our board game, but basic. Well, not basic, but 2 levels, advanced and super advanced. And there's quite a bit you can do with it. It's really amazing what you can do with it. And then, of course, we have a game on the internet where you can, which is, I guess, competing with fantasy, which you can play. You can play in leagues. You can play in leagues on the internet against opponents. So we have, but we have a tremendous following. We have many players who play our games 50 years or more, which is really something. And they are very much avid fans, and they've kept us going for all these years. And here we are going into next year will be our 60th year, and it's unusual for a company to make it to the 25th. So here we are. We've been up to against a lot of major companies. But we still exist, and more than exist, we still are very competitive, particularly in our niche. The thing about our niche is that the bigger companies really can't come to do some of the work we do because it's not worth their time. They can't get enough of a return on it. But we don't need to sell 1 million games to make it profitable. We can sell much less and be profitable, and they cannot be. So there's an niche that we feel that's important. It really is for the diehard fans. Although I must say, in our board game, we have a basic version for the kids, which happens to be an excellent way of teaching kids math. And we have really an elementary game for the kids for that feature. But even playing our baseball board game on the basic level and the advanced level. It's an excellent teaching tool for kids, and it has been used in colleges too. It was used once in the California area for a university. There's a lot of course in it, really working on the probability issue of it, probabilities of players where the game is set up.
John, I want to talk to you about the future of the game again. So for me, when I think about it, I liked rolling the dice and holding the cards and moving the pieces, and I'm now old. As you kind of transition what Strat-O-Matic is for younger people, how do you envision, does the tactile part of this matter anymore? Does it all have to be mobile and online? How do you view what the future looks like for a game like this?
Oh, absolutely. The board game is still really an important large part of our business.
Sorry, John, but I would say 55% of our business is computer and 45% is board game. So the board game is still, we have other products too, basketball, hockey, and football, and college football. The board game still is the baseball board game is still our best seller.
Yeah, so that board game, it'll never go away. It will be our flagship product. But expanding to get the game to kids, in addition to just the board game, that Windows game, and our Hal mentioned our online Baseball 365 game, which is also on mobile. And we do recognize that a lot of kids are on apps and playing games. We've been coming out with a few apps over the past year or so, and we'll be coming out with some more in the future. And we have moved to where people to other platforms where people are finding us. It's not just the board game.
All right, I'll let you go with this. Hal, you're a purist. You love the game. You love the stats. I gotta know, are you angry at the Houston Astros for what they did a couple of years ago?
Well, let me. That's a very yes or no. Let's remember that baseball has had a very questionable past. In the 1890s, I'm going back before everyone's time. There was a man named John McGraw who was a great manager and entered the Hall of Fame. And John McGraw played with the Baltimore Orioles, and so did a man named Hugh Jennings, who also became a manager. And they both were very fine players. And what they would do, the grass was always kept very high in Baltimore. They would plant balls in the outfield. And so when a ball would be hit out there, instead of going for the ball that was hit, they'd pick up the ball that was in the grass and throw it in and hold the front of the first base, or second, or reduce the triple to a double. And things like that happened all the time. I mean, the pitching, everything was legal pitching. I used sandpaper. I used everything before 1920. So, and then of course you had problems in 1919, which everyone knows about. And there were problems way before that, though, with throwing games, etc. And even in the late 20s, it was rumored that Cobb and Speaker, two of the greatest players of all time, were questionable in certain games, but it never followed through, thank goodness. So there have always been problems. And I guess Pete Rose is the last of these problems, in a sense. I'm very sure, I can't say, I can't prove this, but other teams do this also. That has been done over the years. And it was rumored that Bobby Thompson's home run off Ralph Franklin was a tip-off from the scoreboard out in center field. So, it's been going on for a long time, but once talking to a very famous basketball player and talking about taking drugs and making you a better player, which Barry Bonds did. And we talked to him about this, and he said to us, it's a competitive world sport. If I could get a drug that would make me 6 inches taller and keep the same ability, I would take it. And so that's why you have to have controls, because there's always going to be problems if everyone wants to get ahead, and they'll do it any way they can. And if you don't have supervision and supervision from an independent authority or authority above the players and the management, there's going to be problems. And this was a problem. It was a terrible thing that was done. It really was, and it was a shame. But this has to be policed, and they were punished, and I hope this might stop it. But they realize, particularly baseball. Baseball, of all the sports, is considered the American game from the get-go, and it's a game of purity, and we have to keep these things out as much as possible.
Here's the good news about Strat-O-Matic. It's almost impossible to cheat in it. John Garcia is the research director, and Hal Richman is the founder of, in my opinion, humbly, maybe the greatest board game that's ever been created. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Up next, Hannah Keyser from Yahoo Sports will tell us if the robots are getting pushed back thanks to COVID-19. This is the Future Sport Podcast. The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance. So let's take a moment to thank our friends at 3Advance. These guys are ranked one of the nation's top app developers. Their user experience and cloud expertise has helped grow a bunch of sports tech startups, including Team Builder, T-Box Tour, and In-Game Fantasy. So if you're looking for a development partner to bring your future sport tech to life, look these guys up. Go to 3advance.com. They're the team to make it happen, and advance you will. That's the number 3advance.com, and tell them Future Sport sent you. So remember when they were using robot umpires in minor league baseball, and there was likely going to be an expanded rollout of that, and then the eventuality is it's going to be in the major leagues. Well, we need to get baseball back first, but that plan hasn't been completely derailed yet. Let's welcome in Hannah Keyser from Yahoo Sports, who wrote a piece about the robot umpires. Hey, Hannah, how are you?
Good. Well, all right, given the circumstances.
At least you're laughing about it at this point. It's hard to find the humor in it. As far as the robots go, where are we? I mean, clearly nothing can happen until sports comes back. But where are we right now in terms of what was perceived to be a rollout of an expansion of robot umpires?
So we actually left off with a little bit of ambiguity. There was, in addition, increasing their presence in the minor leagues this year. That last year was the Atlantic League with all the experimental rules, and this year is supposed to move to the minors. But in addition to that, there was supposed to be some robot umpire testing in spring training. So they weren't going to be using them to call games, but they were going to be simultaneously running the program while spring training games were going as a way to kind of gauge how well it was working. Now, what I do not know is exactly where that left off. It was taking place in Florida, as far as my reporting was. As far as I was able to report out, it was taking place in Florida. It was taking place at the Cardinals facility, I think at least there. I don't know if there were other places, but they were being a little bit secretive around letting me come look at it or check it. I actually know if they got that off the ground before spring training shut down. So there was supposed to be a fairly dramatic uptick in, if not use, then at least sort of testing and figuring out how to move it from this experimental testing ground of the Atlantic League into actual affiliated baseball. So we're somewhere in there. That's where we are as baseball is on hold. Is somewhere around trying to make that leap from just being in the Atlantic League to being used in games that are actually governed by Major League Baseball.
I mean, listen, being that they're not giving you a ton of information and clearly there's no baseball going on right now, the real tricky part here is even if the majors come back, we don't know if minor league baseball is coming back this year. I don't know how they continue this, at least for this year. Clearly this is going to happen, but for this year, it seems like it is really put on hold.
Yeah, I mean, the minor leagues, people at MLB are still saying they haven't made a decision and that they would never force the minor leagues to play and that, it's always going to be up to what's actually safe and what the health standards are. However, just personally, this is not based on reporting. I don't see how they do that. It's such a huge, one of the big factors is if Major League Baseball comes back, it's going to be such a undertaking, and even then they probably won't be able to have fans. That's a big thing. Everyone knows they might not have fans. Now, there's almost no reason to have minor league baseball if you don't have fans because they're not televised. They're not, it's not, unfortunately, that's going to be the thing that brings the country together in the way that they're kind of hoping Major League Baseball will. So just personally, aside from the value it provides, Major League teams in terms of depth and in terms of getting their players reps and looks, I can't imagine that they would undertake any kind of big sweeping programs like they would have to get Major League Baseball running for the sake of getting minor league baseball running. And so yeah, I think we're kind of not making any progress on the robot umps this year, at least in terms of what the public can see or know about as far as progress. I'm sure that at some point when they're not diverting all, baseball and also scientific resources to solving the coronavirus pandemic, we will get people at Major League Baseball talking about robot umpires again and talking about what they would need to do. One of the things that I thought was interesting was that as part of some early reports around the Arizona plan and these sort of biodome plans, it sounded like a lot of people were well, if they're going to do this weird shortened season, they should experiment with all sorts of things, including robot umpires. And it sounds like they wouldn't be ready for that. So it's not like they're waiting in the wings and the reason we're not going to see them is because there's no baseball. They're still very much perfecting the system and figuring out exactly how to integrate it anyway. And so probably this pushes us back a couple of years, although I'm sure they'll figure out a way to make some progress on the actual technical side at some point.
From what you know, because you wrote about there were kinks in the system, when you say there are kinks in the system so far, what are you referring to? So I guess what I'm getting at is, from what you know to this point, where are the issues that they need to clear up before they could literally roll something like this out?
I think a lot of it has to do with standardizing the strike zone. So now we're talking way back in terms of reporting, but I went last year to see it, to see what was then TrackMan and what might not be TrackMan going forward, but the robot umpires that they had in the Atlantic League. And the problems they were having there were around strike zones that were, because the strike zone actually sort of has to be flexible. The idea that the whole point of robot umpires is that the strike zone won't be too flexible. It won't be flexible in a way that makes it wrong, but you do need it to be a little bit flexible in terms of if you always call pitches by the book, you're sometimes calling pitches that cross into the strike zone, but are just hitting the corner at the last, or the catcher is sort of catching it in a way that causes it to cross the strike zone, but it wouldn't look like a strike. And so I'm having a hard time explaining that in a way that's makes it sound like a flaw and not a.
Yeah, I mean, the catchers framing pitches have gamed up real umpires for years. So I think I get exactly what you're saying.
But not just in a way that's we need to sort of smooth out this human error. I think it's more in a way that it was a pitch could sort of be diving and catch just the bottom corner of a strike zone in a way that was not actually that shouldn't be a strike. And if you watch the game, you wouldn't be oh, that's a terrible call when you over the ball. You'd be that's the ball. And so that's the sort of baseball side that needs to be worked out as far as I know. And then I think also the actual technology, having enough safeguards in place that this wouldn't glitch at the wrong time or miss a call at the wrong time or black out if there was a 2-second power outage, whatever. So I think there's the baseball. We need to figure out exactly how flexible and smooth or sort of hard and rigid the strike zone needs to be. And then I'm sure there's way more stuff that I don't actually know about on the side that is what does this rollout look like? How many fail safes do you need? How many backup programs do you need to have it going in 15 stadiums a night for 4 months?
Oh, man, if there was ever a time to roll something like this out, it's the time of social distancing, but they're just not quite ready yet.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Hal Keyser from Yahoo Sports, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, happy to.
That will do it for us this week. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3 Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz, calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3 Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.